Now, part of Peter Dutton's plan to get nuclear into Australia would involve overturning bans that have been in place for decades now. Joining us live is the former Deputy Prime Minister, John Anderson. John, always good to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time. So when you were in government, you, of course, helped legislate that ban on nuclear energy back in 1998, which I note you now regret. But what was the reasoning for it back then?
Well, it had to do with us wanting to pursue some policy issues that, if you like, resulted in some horse trading in the Senate that was unfortunate, but didn't seem to be so very threatening at the time. I'd have to say to you that, in my view, neither are the current bans. If the political willpower to change our minds is there, then those bans can be lifted. Should they be lifted? Yes, because you won't have an honest debate about costings until they're lifted. I read in the papers that nobody wants to estimate the banks, the financial houses, the economists don't want to try and work out what nuclear power would cost. Of course they don't. Whenever there's a ban in place, they'd be wasting their time and their resources. Lift the ban, have an honest debate, and you'll get some honest answers as well about which you can have that honest debate.
Well, we're certainly having an honest debate and getting honest answers here on First Edition throughout the course of the last week or so. But even if Peter Dutton wins the election, how tough would it be to overturn the moratorium and the state bans?
Well, this becomes a question, seriously, of our national maturity. Let's be brutally honest here. We're a nation in decline economically. Our living standards are slipping. The cost of living crisis we have is related to the energy cost we face and will become worse as energy reliability is threatened. We're in danger of an incredible trifecta. We're going to miss those goals, those targets. That's as obvious as your nose on your face, particularly 2030. I haven't met an economist or an engineer yet who thinks we can go within a bull's roar of meeting them. We're going to have incredibly expensive power as well as unreliable power. And we're going to damage ourselves badly economically. So are we up for a mature debate, given that the rest of the world is moving towards nuclear? We've got to remember we were enthusiastic participants at the COP in Scotland, where the broader consensus was that nuclear power generation around the world should be tripled by 2030, 50. Are we going to be part of that debate? Or do we actually have such an inability to break free, an inability to think honestly about our future, and an inability to think that we could actually do this? Apparently we can do nuclear submarines, but no, we couldn't manage this technology. I hear people saying we should have started it 30 years ago. Well, maybe we should have started it 30 years ago. But the idea that we can't do it, I thought we were supposed to be a clever country.
But those short-term issues that you talk about, I mean, that's not going to change, right, even if we press ahead with nuclear, because the first plant or reactor wouldn't be here if things go well by the mid-2030s.
But the whole point is that you cannot have reliable power, let alone affordable power, and reliable is the most important thing. I mean, you won't have industry if you don't have reliable power. If the power starts going off, we live in a country like many African countries, a lot of your viewers will have been there, the power comes on for a few hours every day and then it goes off. If we don't have reliable power, we won't have industry. So reliability is the first thing. You can't do it with renewables. You can't do it with weather-dependent technologies. The idea that batteries will do the job and give us the backup we need, they might do it for homes, but it won't do it for industry. It won't do it for smelters. We're worried about gas. That's another fossil fuel.
Yeah.
We're not going to make those targets anyway. Let's understand that. Let's be honest about it. It's blowing in the wind to say we're going to meet those targets of 2030. There's not a serious engineer anywhere that I've met who thinks we can do it. And I don't see how you can get to net zero by 2050 either without nuclear. I don't see how you can do it. So the choice has become quite binary. We can accept that we go on continuing our economic slide. The cost of living becomes permanent. And of course, many people won't say it, but many activists actually think that's part of the key. We've got to reduce our living standard.
Hey, John,
they're not honest enough to say it.
Yeah.
But it'll become a reality if we don't have a more honest debate. It's as simple as that.
I'm curious, AEMO, it's this morning dismissed nuclear talk, saying renewables is the way to go, but we're a long way behind where we need to be. That's what it says as part of its report this morning. I'm curious about what your thoughts about AEMO are.
Well, I'm deeply troubled because I think they're part of the mechanism, and I have to include the CSIRO in this, where really their reports look very much like they're driven to suit the government of the day and the ethos, if you like, the zeitgeist of the day. The mere fact that they're saying we're way behind, yes, we are way behind. They're not offering a way to catch up. That tells you that if you really want to move towards net zero, you may not meet the targets, but to get there, you're actually going to have to think much more broadly. What are they doing? Shutting down the debate. Look, I'll be honest, I think it's pathetic. And I think it's almost treasonous to the genuine interest of Australians. I think Australians need to face the reality that we're now living in a climate where ideology wins out over the real interest of the Australian people almost day in, day out. And that's why I say the bans need to be lifted. And that's a question of national willpower. Are we going to stand up now, finally, get engaged again and say our futures are at stake? And the nonsense that's going on around this issue at the moment, you know, they talk about the coalition's costing. What on earth are the current set of policies going to cost us? Not just to put that renewable in, but what are the real costs of the loss of industry when we don't have reliable power anymore? We'll end up like California, a new feudal state where you've got the hyper wealthy at the top, no middle class because industry's gone, and 80% of the emerging jobs are basically low-paid barista type and cleaning type jobs. That's what's happened in California. It's coming our way if we continue to debate these issues with the superficiality and the childishness that is on display at the moment.
Okay. Just because you're wise on many matters, John, I've got to ask you about Julian Assange this morning. Plenty of movement. He could well be back in Australia by tonight. Have you got a thought on what's happened over the past 24 hours?
Well, I'm very surprised by it. You know, he's going to accept apparently a level of guilt and will have a conviction. I'm troubled by this. I really am, because I'm not convinced that this hasn't put people's lives, even, you know, the whole incident over the years, releasing information that's secret for good reason. I know sometimes governments need to be exposed. I know that, but that's true. High quality journalists sometimes have to go looking for that stuff. But great dumps of classified information, I don't believe that's very wise. I think it can be very damaging. And I hope at least out of this comes an understanding you need to be a lot more careful and stop and think about who you may be harming if you're going to engage in those sorts of activities.